All right, we're going to do a little recording here of a historical event today, which is actually sad. I know some people may be jumping up and down because of this occurring, but to me, it's not a happy moment at all. This is June, Tuesday, the 13th, year 2023, of an incident that has been boiling now for quite some time, and why they let it go as long as they've let it go actually is a big no-no as far as I'm concerned. Kind of like the case that what went on up there in New York. Why would they have let it go as long as it went before they ever decided to act upon to it? There are certain legal ramifications that are not only put in place for the victim, but also for the defendant. And whenever you have a court or a system that is willing to no longer obligate themselves to the same set of rules, then you have an unfair system. And this has been one of Donald J. Trump's plea to America all along, pertaining to those that can't represent themselves in a fair, formal way, such as the poor, the working class, especially with the hire of attorneys being so high. I'm just going to illustrate on what they told me whenever I was going through what I was going through in Kentucky. Trigg County, Kentucky, is that after I did make bail before I went to my second arraignment, that I'd went to several different attorneys in Clarksville, Tennessee, that had license, with it being on the border of being able to practice law either in Kentucky or Tennessee, and they was telling me that because it had reached this level, even though it was being handled by the local officials, because it was being moved up to an actual felony, that put a brand new status on the case, and instead of it being a normal $1,500 to $2,500 case, it was going to be more like $1,000 to $12,000, maybe $15,000 case. And of course, my hands was tied at the time. I didn't have that kind of money to let go of. I wasn't a citizen of the state of Kentucky. I couldn't put down a property bond. And of course, whenever they raised my bond to $25,000, that in and of itself landlocked me to the point that I wasn't going to get out of jail. And I think just about any attorney would tell you that for you to be able to fight your case, you have a whole lot stronger chances of winning fighting it outside the jailhouse than you do if you're locked up inside the jailhouse, because it's one thing to hire an attorney that's supposed to do your footwork for you, and it's another thing if you actually get out there and hit the bushes and do your own footwork and find out the information. That way you can present it to your attorney that can be presented before the courts. The way that they railroaded me over 2 non-threatening telephone calls, because it was the form of people that was doing it, wasn't the charge. It was who was in behind the charge. Just like Miss Fleming's told me, that was my public defender. She said, "You have made somebody mad or upset somebody in a high positioning office. And because they have put the word out towards getting you, at this point in time, it doesn't matter if it was something major or something minor. Because of that person, that put this order out towards go get him, they went and got you. Now, if that is not a biased, judgmental, prejudiced court, I'll kiss your tail and give you 30 minutes to draw up a crowd. Because just like whenever I come back here to Tennessee in 2014, they had already made up their minds that I was guilty of something. It didn't matter what. I was guilty of something in their minds. And because of it, David and I went in front of Johnson, that at the time was the leading prosecuting attorney in this area, under Tommy Thomas, that basically looked at me and said, I'm not going to represent you come hell or high water. Your brother, on the other hand, I'll represent him. Well, I didn't have no warrants. I didn't have no fines. And I had paid my debt to society. And at that point in time, Tommy Thomas's employee, which was Johnson, that's from Arkansas, never should have made that statement pertaining to defending me towards the BS that was going on out here at 291 Thompson Road or 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip 38255. He was banking on now we can get Mr. Jackson towards being a repeated offender. And that theory of being a repeated offender actually works in correspondence to the courts being fair. Let's say if you get caught with one DUI, then you get caught with two DUIs. Well, the reason why the charge on the second DUI usually doubles on the first DUI is because now you are looked upon as being a repeated offender. Where Johnson could have cared less, he could have cared less that the people up in Kentucky was basically bringing up false charges on me because 2 telephone calls initiated over the span of a 90-day period cannot even be looked upon as being telephone harassment, much less stalking in the first degree as they had me charged. But because it was charged on my record, even though it had been later reformed and put down to a misdemeanor, Mr. Johnson worked upon to that and basically cornered me up during the time after my brother had died, though 2 telephone calls had been made towards the concerns about 3 little children across the road. Johnson didn't care about that. Johnson didn't care that those people up there in Kentucky was being unfair and that they was taking something and turning it into a big mountain, just a little bitty molehill of me making 2 telephone calls, a non-threatening telephone calls telling those people up there in Land Between the Lakes that my story was going to that I was going to tell my story and other people was going to find out about it. Even Miss Flemings that was representing me said, "You're being treated unfairly." I go, "Well, get me out of here. Get me out of this situation." She said, "I can't." I go, "Why?" "Because it's who you're coming up against. You're coming up against a party of people that is associated with something that's federal on a federal level pertaining to Land Between the Lakes, and because of it, there's nothing that I can do." And I thought to myself, especially whenever I was asked the first time towards going and doing a third psychological mental evaluation within basically a 5-year period, and I said, "I don't feel like that I need no psychological evaluation." And then she come back later and she said, "Well, it don't matter what you think. They've still ordered for you to go up to LaGrange, Kentucky and be studied, and that's whenever they put poison in me, and that's whenever they caused the obesity that in relation towards caused the diabetes, basically trying to finish me off. And I've said this all along, doctors that perform lobotomies on people, that is against the law here in America, but they can do a chemical lobotomy that can be just as damaging as an actual syringe lobotomy that doctors used to have control over people's lives in the early to the mid 1800s. Towards that's the way that they controlled people, especially those that was out of hand, those that was violent. I have never showed any actions towards being violent. Did not show none in my arrest, did not show none during the time of me being incarcerated in Christian County, because Trigg County didn't have a jail. Wasn't no type of problems pertaining to me getting violent or angry or showing any type of violent intentions while I was in LaGrange, Kentucky, but yet now I get forced to have to take medication that swells me up and turns me into a diabetic. And Johnson, because of his evil-minded, insincere ways, he thought that now I got Mr. Jackson, and though his brother had died, though he was grieving over his brother, he was still dead set, now jumping from Tommy Moore up to Judge Pence, which was a federal judge, that now we sure enough got him towards sticking him in jail and letting him go through the same song and dance for almost a year over 2 non-threatening telephone calls in the span of a 90-day period. So whenever they talk about unjust treatment, regardless whether it's coming from Donald J. Trump, a prior president, or it's coming from the individual in behind the camera right now, I can truly verify and validate that this type of illegitimacies are not only unfair, they're not only ungodly, it's not only what our system was not originated to be like, but because of all the illegitimacies that's happening right now, I truly believe that that's the reason why that this great nation has fallen under the hand of an invisible God towards being under judgment. Please listen.
Council has handed down, and Donald Trump himself on a personal basis will have to defend the actions he's been accused of.
David, we might see more evidence when and if this goes to trial. We've seen quite a bit of information released in the indictment, but surely prosecutors have held some of it back, and it could include maybe more audio tapes with Donald Trump. We at least have a little bit of Donald Trump on audio, according to the indictment, talking about classified information. Hearing Donald Trump say this himself, if this evidence does get released to the public, do you think that that might have an effect on a primary election or a general election next year if this goes to trial, say March, April, May, June, in the heady days of the end of the primary, the beginning of the general?
Yeah, Katie, we haven't seen evidence of that, right? You would think so. That would seem to be the case. Frankly, a wise defendant in this case, one without the vanities of Donald Trump, would probably have sought a plea deal that had this taken care of now and to be done with before the Republican primary. I think what we will see, and Chuck Rosenberg and many of the other attorneys who keep us smart here at MSNBC have suggested...
David, I need to interrupt you because we're going to hear from Elena Haba. She is not a lawyer on this case, but she is a Trump lawyer based in New Jersey. We expect to be coming up to the here she is. Let's listen.
Destruction of the long-standing American principles that have set this country apart for so long. In recent years, we have seen the rise of politically motivated prosecutors who don't care for impartiality, who don't care for due process or equal protection of laws. They have been quietly but aggressively cultivating a two-tiered system of justice where selective treatment is the norm. From the Russia hoax, to the attorney generals, to the corrupt DAs in Georgia and New York, and now this. The people in charge of this country do not love America. They hate Donald Trump. What we are witnessing today is blatant and unapologetic weaponization of the criminal justice system. The Biden appointed special counsel has sought fit to bring 37 federal charges against President Trump, the leading frontrunner, less than a year and a half before an election. Countless other individuals, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden himself, retained possession of classified documents yet have not been prosecuted. And none of them came into possession of those documents while they were president. None of them were president who, as the head and sole member of the executive branch, has the power to summarily declassify documents. The decision to pursue charges against President Trump while turning a blind eye to others is emblematic of the corruption that we have here. We are at a turning point in our nation's history. The targeting, prosecution of a leading political opponent is the type of thing you see in dictatorships.
So we're going to
like
continue
Cuba
to have our folks
and
listen to Alina
Venezuela.
Habba, but she is saying many of the things that we have heard from the president himself. She is someone who seems to be serving as a kind of spokesperson for this team, which, as we said at the beginning of these hours, that Donald Trump is frankly having some trouble filling, and she herself doesn't really have any background in criminal law. She's done real estate law, she's done family law, a number of other things, and has worked for Donald Trump, but this is not her area of expertise. But I do want to ask you about one thing that she said, Andrew, because she brings up Joe Biden, she brings up Hillary Clinton. And so maybe that is a hint of what will be the legitimate defense or what they bring into the courtroom. Could his lawyers file a select?
Did you notice how quickly that MSNBC wanted to get their camera away from the lady that was talking in behalf of Donald Trump once she was fixing to get into her spiel about how that the court system here in America was basically operating the same as third world banana Republican countries all over the world based upon favoritism? Not facts, but people being prejudiced against other people, just like Johnson that told my brother and I, standing in his office together, and you keep in mind people like David Moore, ex-chief Darren Martin, his wife Lisa. I remember whenever I was a teenager, of course at that time you could drink at the age of 18. They didn't move the drinking age up to 21 until after I was probably already about, I guess I was about 22, 23 years old. May not have been that old, I don't know. But I used to go to frat parties with this town up here being a college town. And I couldn't tell you the amount of people, the very people that's in power right now, sitting either in behind badges or courts of law, that went to those same frat parties, that was drinking and that was smoking weed and was getting high and having a good time, that now today, because they've wisened up and they've got a little bit of education, and now they've gotten a title that gives them the power. I couldn't tell you the very same people that I participated in with some of these frat parties, and some of them was way out in the country. I mean, whenever you had 300 or 400 people and you got a big bonfire and you're getting high with one of the people that was elected 9 times here in Weakley County towards being a sheriff pertaining to Mike Wilson, whenever you're sitting there smoking weed with them and drinking with them, and then later on they deny it, it tells you proof is in the pudding towards what kind of people that those people are. just like David Moore and his wife Lisa. These people has had a personal agenda against me for some reason, and the only reason why that I can think that they would do or have that deep of a rejection against me would be either because of my brother Danny, towards him being an actual out and out alcoholic. Of course, nobody was concerned about what Danny had to go through pertaining to an abusive World War II scarred, violent father. But it was either that or the things that my great-grandfather done that basically caused society to turn against him, even though he was very loyal to the people in initiating the services for the people, up until those services all of a sudden changed here in America, basically after the Spanish flu pandemic, and also after World War I, and also after the great fall of the Depression in 1929, whenever that occurred, that things was in transformation at that time, to the point that you keep in mind, out here in the country, they're usually about 7, 8, 10, maybe even 20 years behind, depending upon what you're talking about. And they was still practicing stuff out here like they was doing in the 1800s or late 1800s, towards hanging people and having courts of law on a one judge type panel. And my grandfather took a part of that for a few years before the Great Depression basically broke him, because he was trying to hold everybody else up. And then they turned on him because of the actions of what he was involved in, even though the things that he was involved in was wrong. It was wrong in what he was doing. But at the time, that's not how that they looked at things. At the time, they looked at what they was doing was justifiable. That's another reason why that I bring up from time and time again, that you can be sincere, but at the same time, you can be sincerely wrong. Just like the people that believes in Allah, that if you strap a suicide vest on your body and you go out into a crowd of people and you pull the detonator cord and you wind up killing yourself and 100 people and injuring another 200 people, that as long as you do that in honor of Allah, you're going to go to heaven, live with 99 virgins, and drink all the wine you want. To people like us in the Western world that hears that, we immediately snigger or laugh because we think, wow, how foolish. But it's not foolish. Because if an individual is sincere enough that they're willing to take their own life, that has reached a level of no longer being unserious, but very serious. Because you have to be a very serious person to do something like that, or to basically just deliberately commit suicide by jumping off a building or swallowing a bunch of pills or putting a gun to your mouth. It takes a lot of sincerity to do that. But the point that I'm trying to make is those people that are sincere are sincerely wrong. Because God ain't going to ask nobody to put a suicide vest on their body and go out here and not only maliciously kill yourself, but kill other people, innocent bystanders, just for the gain of going to heaven. The gain of going to heaven. God ain't going to ask nobody to do that. So obviously their God that they claim is their God ain't really God, but it's really the devil. That's ideology coming from the devil. Well, we know by how that they pursued their court and order in the 1800s, especially before and after the Civil War here in America, that it was unjust. And in lots of cases, not only was it unjust, but it was evilly motivated, evilly mindedly motivated. Especially whenever you hunt down an individual just because he's black and you don't want him or her in your neighborhood, you bring up all kinds of lies and innuendos that this person done this, this, and this, and then the judge goes along with it and then wind up hanging this individual from a tree. Those people that participated in those type of actions will give an account for what they done in the day of judgment. Just like us in our day will give an account for everything that we have done. Just like Johnson and Tommy Thomas, Mike Wilson, Judge Tommy Moore, Judge Mike Pence, ex-chief David Moore, his wife Lisa, other law enforcement officials that has worked in this area, or maybe are no longer working, or maybe they're actually already deceased, I don't know. But those people will have to give an account for what that they have done towards whether or not it was fair or it was not fair. And basically, the unfairness treatment fell upon to my life in such of a horrendous way that it basically costed the life of a younger brother at the age of 51, because it was so emotionally stressful, he couldn't bear it. He couldn't bear it, not only that in which what was going on in his brother's life, and don't think for a second that me and David didn't sit and talk about things, because we did. You know, he talked about how that I was having to get out here and live like a fugitive, going from town to town, going from basically being a disaster relief humanitarian person towards being a storm chaser, towards going around following catastrophes all over the countryside, to the point of how basically this whole neighborhood exploded just because of me coming back here. And proof is in the pudding pertaining to how corrupt that these individuals are, that has these personal vendettas. And I don't know why Pence, I don't know why Tommy Moore, I don't know why Tommy Thomas and Johnson, that was the prosecuting attorney, I don't know why they done what they done. But I tell you somebody that does, and his name begins with a capital G-O-D. And if their motives are twisted in the form of being evilly motivated, then they are no longer effective in being worthy to stand in the position that they either did stand in or are still standing in. And the way that I understand it, Johnson has basically taken over Tommy Thomas's position, that now he's like the supervisor. And I think there's a woman prosecutor here in Weakley County. I don't know if they probably jump back and forth to counties, go to Obion County and Weakley County like they used to do. But those people that has personal vendettas, and I've said this all along, whenever it comes to the human concept, it's hard to take something that has occurred in the past and act as if that it never had occurred, even though that person has done already paid their price or paid for their crime in the eyes of society. And even though the charge may be a completely different charge, it's still almost impossible for that same prosecutor to take and act like none of either or the above had happened in the past. But like I said, whenever they initiated charges on me towards me stalking, and to this day I still can't understand how that a person can be charged stalking with their neighbor across the road unless you're out there either with a tripod with a camera purposely trying to film them day and night, or you're actually stalking them to the degree that you got some sort of crosshairs on them, going to do bodily harm to them. And in my case, it was neither above. In my case, it was strictly because of the tenant that they had, of the landlord that we was having trouble with, and because of the concern for the children was the only reason why that David and I could have cared less about what was going on across the road, especially with what was going on across the road was affecting us on this side of the road. And it wasn't just that particular tenant, but it was other tenants that that the landlord had that basically thought that they was going to make a heyday towards turning everything around here into a circus. And to think that the people that observed that during the time that they was observing that done that in the form of entertainment, do you not think that those people are going to be held in contempt too one day in heaven? Not only will Johnson be held in contempt, not only will Tommy Moore and Judge Pence and people like David Moore and his wife Lisa, not only will they be held in contempt, but all these people around here that is associated with government affairs that have purposely went out of their way, not just affecting my life, but all the other people's lives that has been treated unfairly, just like Donald J. Trump. Like I said, whenever she got to talking about the representative representing Donald J. Trump, whenever she got to talking about tyranny type third world banana republic, that's whenever the camera all of a sudden got off of her and we no longer want to listen to what she's got to say because she's trying to validate her client, which is Donald J. Trump. Well, whenever you excuse the truth of what is going on here in America pertaining to it being a two-tier justice system, that one tier we're going to treat one way, but another tier we're going to treat another way. Whenever you have this type of unfairness going on, then you no longer have gotten a true justice of the peace, just order. Because now you're operating off of two different orders. And that's one of the reasons why that I feel like that these judges are basically any politician, that it's for disadvantage of the people because they stay in power and they get elected again and again and again and again. And in the term of a judge, I'm just using this as a local judge, in the term of most judges that stay in power for that length of time, let's say this county's got 30,000 people in it, within the term of Tommy Moore, he'll probably know somewhere between 12, 15 to possibly 20,000 people. He'll either know them directly or indirectly because he has been in power for that length of time. And he picks up information from this one, picks up information from that one. It's either directly or indirectly. But if you stay in there, like Mike Wilson did for 30-something years, do you not think that you're going to have unfair just due? Do you not think that you're going to have clonies? Do you not think that you're going to have people that you're going to favor to and other people because you dislike them? You're going to basically throw them under the bus if they so much as step on a wooden nickel? I had no idea whenever I come back to Northwest Tennessee what I was coming back to until I already come back here. You keep in mind, whenever I was growing up in Northwest Tennessee, I was part of that clan. I was part of that group that was inherited old school, kind of like grandfathered in, to the point that if we done a little wrong, as long as it wasn't a whole lot wrong, the cops ordinarily turned their heads about it and didn't say nothing about it. Just like the weed that traveled through the area, you know good and well, they know who was bringing it in. Well, they didn't care who was bringing it in. As a matter of fact, they actually protected the people that was bringing it in, because after it gets brought in, then they turn it into a game, and then the judges make money, the prosecuting attorneys make money, the jail administration makes money, the lawyers make money. It's a money, money, money situation. And they've been preying on the people like that now for years and years and years, and that's just one particular incident that I'm talking about pertaining to marijuana. I could go on and on and on of the unfair favoritism that goes on in these little rink-a-dink counties where people that knows other people that basically can almost get away with murder, why some people can't do nothing without being mandated or prosecuted. Donald Trump has a legitimate defense in defending himself of the same effects of what went on with Hillary Clinton, what went on with the records of Bill Clinton, what went on with the records of either Biden, the president that's president right now. The fault falls upon those that allowed for those records to leave the White House to begin with. That's where the fault. If they're going to prosecute somebody, they need to go in there and prosecute those people, because the head of the archives never should have allowed for that stuff to have left to begin with, because they know that belongs to we the people. Regardless of the sensitivity of it, it belongs to we the people. And if I'm not mistaken, it was the Clintons that actually was going to back up with a Ryder truck and start loading up a bunch of pictures and furniture out of the White House. I guess that they had various affairs with various countrymen in various places with. They was taking upon themselves by saying, hey, this is ours. They don't understand that whenever they get in these positions, especially these high political ranking positions, they're no longer of themselves. They're actually owned by we the people. And that's the reason why that we scrutinize their lives the way that we do, because they make the type of money and we offer the type of protection for them that we do. I know it sounds bad pertaining to them having privacy. It affects their children. It affects their families. It affects everybody around them to some degree. But, that's the cost of working in public affairs, working with the public like that. To some incidences, the principal up here in the Sharon School or the Weakley County School or the Westview School, his life gets scrutinized. The teachers that teach those children, those people's lives get scrutinized. It's not just the sheriff. It's not just the deputies. It's not just the judges or the political affairs pertaining to the mayors or whoever. Yes, those people's lives are going to be scrutinized. And there's going to be somebody that's going to be watching them that's going to hold them accountable. And Donald Trump's case is based upon how come that they didn't hold Hillary Clinton accountable or other prior presidencies or even a sitting president. How come they didn't hold them accountable, but Donald J. Trump once more stepped on that wooden nickel, and because of it, he's going to jail. So whenever they talk about a two-tier system, this two-tier system now has been going on for quite some time. And if it hadn't been going on one level because of one reason, it's been going on another level because of another reason. The biggest reason is because if you can't defend yourself and you can't get out here and hire a $10 or $12 or $20,000 attorney, odds are you're going to have to be railroaded in whatever that they say that you've done that you know that you didn't do. And it already had reached the state of my life in the late 50s, especially after going through what that I had went through pertaining to the Oklahoma investigation and me being arrested and dragged back to Kentucky and basically being railroaded the third time, and then me going back out to Oklahoma and realizing that those people was holding my feet to the fire in regards towards me trying to do civil work for a church group, and because various law enforcement agencies recognized me, I was almost threatened to be arrested. And here I am trying to do a good deed. Once I realized how unfair that the system had become because of various people that's making it corrupt, I realized at that point in time, I'm at a no win-win situation. And of course, whenever I come back to Tennessee and I realized what had been going on for the past 3 years that my brother and I had done already talked about, whenever I had already went to jail, being charged with stalking, attempted to take my own life, was still grieving over my brother's death, not understanding how wicked and demonic that these people over in this area had become, including their judges, including their prosecuting attorneys, including everybody and their brother. Whatever Johnson would have told me in his negotiations with the public prosecutor, if he would have told me that I had to stand on my head 15 times a day, even though I was pleading guilty to a charge that I know that I wasn't guilty of, I would have stood on my head 15 times a day for as long as he ordered me to do that. Because it had already reached a state in my life that now it was affecting me, not just emotionally, not just mentally, but now physically. Especially whenever they took me down to Bolivar and they recognized for the first time that I did in fact have diabetes. I was not pre-diabetes. They immediately put a label on me toward me being a type 2 diabetes. And I had no idea up until that occurred that I was a type 2 diabetic. So because of the emotions, because of the strain, because of all the other bad behavior coming from these law enforcement agencies, they basically drove me off into a state of bad health and drove my brother off into a state of death. Now I realize the emotional invisible killer pertaining to emotions you can't see. So it's really hard to prove that my brother died of a broken heart, of how that the public had turned against us. Like I said, it was either that they was really dead set in how that they wanted to get me out of society, that they was willing to do whatever it took to do so, or if it may have had something to do with some of the affairs that my great grandfather had to do with back in the early 1900s. I don't think it really had anything to do with my grandfather, because in the process of his children having children, there was another group of Jacksons that strained off, and to this day I've got basically a TBI. I don't know if he's an investigator or agent or what he is over there in Union City that works for this area, that it didn't affect his life any, that I know of, pertaining to what his great grandfather was a part of, because his great grandfather is my great grandfather. We're like, I don't know, fourth or fifth cousins, but we still come from that same genealogy pool. I personally believe that they thought that they had a big fish, and if they could have captured me or caught me doing something that I wasn't supposed to have done, and if they could have taken me out of the eyes of society for the rest of my life, that is what that they intended to do all along. Which once more is a derivative of a unfair, corrupt, evil, just system. Because it's no longer justice. Now you're talking about vigilante type justices. Whenever you got a personal vendetta against a person to the point that you're not willing to treat that person fairly, and they're relying upon you because you're in a position that you should protect them just like you protect any and everybody else. Whenever you're no longer doing your job effectively and efficiently that way, then you have a corrupt system. These are the things that Donald Trump originally went into power towards trying to pull the plug on in draining the swamp. But obviously, Donald J. Trump didn't walk the line, or he once more made somebody angry that's now willing to go after him the way that they're willing to go after him, just like they was willing to go after me the way that they was willing to go after me, even though it was my brother and I that was concerned about 3 little children across the road. When does it stop? When their American people say enough is enough and they change the mental concept of what is going on and what has been going on. You know, whenever I was going through various events and commotions, I couldn't tell you the amount of times that people would tell me, well, the way the system is set up, that if you're on paper, they want to keep you on paper. Towards basically going through that evolving door. And in a way, I can actually see where certain people believe that, because especially your black people that gets picked on, because if you're the wrong person, oh, they're coming after you. Oh, he's black. He must be a thief. He must have stole something. He must be a crackhead. He must be this. He must be that. Being judgmental. Having a concept, stereotyping a person that way is not justice. That's vigilante justice. I think what Donald Trump done was wrong in taking the records. And I think whenever the DA or whoever it was that requested for the records to be given back and Donald Trump refused to give the records back, I think that was wrong. But there might have been a justifiable reason, is in the reason why that he wanted to hang on to those records, invalidating a case later on to the people, because of how corrupt that our government had become in disclosing these cover-ups, regardless whether it was the cover-up down in Mount Carmel, Waco, Texas in 1993, or the cover-up that happened in 1995 pertaining to the Oklahoma bombing, or the cover-up pertaining to who was actually involved in the 9/11 ordeal that Donald Trump has discussed and said that the American people still has not gotten down to the bottom of. It's really bad whenever you as a president has to become an investigator in investigating the people's work before you to identify, well, this is where they took a left turn. When if they would have stayed on target and doing this, maybe we wouldn't be where we are at now. Because you have to admit, the chain of events that's happened in Donald Trump's administration was already there. He basically inherited these problems. And of course, by throwing COVID on top of the presidency, that just added that much more insult to injury pertaining to what the man had to go through. And there's no doubt, he wasn't no doctor. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a professional politician. We're talking about somebody that done deals with construction outfits and then become an entertainer pretending that you're fired. And all of a sudden you're going to put this guy in a position that now he's accountable for all these people. It may have very well been possible that he come across some information in those records that he felt deemed necessary to hang on to towards disclosing them to the American people. I don't know that that is the case, but something must have motivated him in whenever they requested for the records to be given back. He didn't want to give them back. Now, this leads to another question. What was Donald Trump's true motives? Was he handling these records because he was selling them to other countries? Was he an actual double agent to the point that he was acting like that he was for the American people, but in reality, he really wasn't? He was for another country? I mean, these are questions that I feel like the American people has a right of getting down to the bottom of.
Collective prosecution motion.
They could, but I do think that what she is saying is an important public debate. If you are trying to understand what this country is now going through, the issue of whether there is selective prosecution, not in the legal sense, but is somebody being targeted because one party doesn't like the other party, is something that you don't want to see happen here. And so what you want to know is there really proof? And are other people situated being prosecuted? And then the answer to those questions is yes, that there are people who are similarly situated being prosecuted, Democrats and Republicans. And is the real answer to this that you just don't prosecute people who retain classified information and obstruct justice?
I want to mention that it is now reportable from a U.S. Marshal spokesperson that both Donald Trump and Walt Nata have been booked inside that federal courthouse in Miami. Just a couple of two quick corrections for Alina Habba.
There were several things.
Well, one of them, she said President Biden appointed the special counsel. The Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed the special counsel. And one other notable fact, this investigation was launched before Donald Trump announced he was running for president. So it was only after it was launched that he announced he was running, and then it became a political issue of this is a candidate, you can't do this to a candidate. But he was investigated before he announced.
And just to Andrew's point, 2 CIA directors, Democratic administration CIA directors, were prosecuted, as well as a national security advisor.
Absolutely.
So
David Petraeus, John Deutsch, Sandy Berger. And then just last week, a relatively low-level former military officer got 3 years in jail.
I want to say this, that I know for a fact, because I lived in Milan, Tennessee for over 4 years, working for Jerry Smith's body shop. There was another guy that was going to climb on board towards having another little bitty body shop there in Milan, outside of Milan, by the name of Keith Beard. And he was doing real good with his business. You know, you play the game of the insurance game towards them favoritism them to you, depending upon the quality of work and whether or not your word is good and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. He was doing real good until he finally decided to throw his hat in towards running for mayor, city mayor. And whenever that occurred, they took everything and turned it upside down in that man's life to the point that they absolutely caused him basically to declare bankruptcy. They ruined that man's life because he had thrown his hat into a political arena, and because he had made some people upset or made them mad, those people come after him, and the next thing you know, they was taking him for everything he was worth. Now that just doesn't go on in one county. That goes on all over America, county for county. That means if you're the wrong person and you decide to run for public office, let's say you're running for sheriff, and you're the wrong person, and I know this is going to sound cold, callous, and cruel, but if you're the wrong person, you're liable to wind up with your automobile down by the riverbank somewhere or down in a field somewhere, either pushed off into the water or possibly caught a fire, and the individual that owns the automobile would actually be in the automobile. Don't say that this don't go on. And it's based upon corruption within the fundamentals of that area of who's in control and who wants to remain and stay in control. And most of those people that I'm talking about winds up going to church every Sunday wearing a nice shirt and a tie or a good-looking pair of slacks or a dress. They are disguised. They are monsters. They come in sheep's clothing, but they're actually raging wolves inside. And I'm not saying for one iota that Donald Trump is an angel or he's a saint, because I know, and everybody else does too, that you don't crawl up the corporate ladder without stepping on some people's toes. I mean, you've heard some of the things come out of his mouth about women and about how that this happened and that happened, and some of the things that he talks about, you know, he's really not what you'd call a Christian moral man just by his actions. But in another way, you can look at Donald Trump towards him being a straight shooter. He really don't try to cover up those things. And which in one way, he actually may be better off than the hypocrite down the road here that's good about covering up their actions, that pretends to be one thing, but in reality is something else. But this don't have nothing to do with morals, what's going on right now with Donald Trump. What this has got to do with is safety, security, documents that was asked by a certain person to bring them back. Donald Trump refused to bring them back during the time that he brought them back, and now they're making a big deal out of it. Maybe it does deserve to be made a big deal. Maybe they can prove that he was doing something on the level of a spy, selling records, selling information to our adversary. And if that be the case, I hope they prosecute him to the full extent of the law. I hope that they handcuff him and he does wind up spending time in jail over what he's doing, because nobody should be held. Anybody, it don't matter who it is, pertaining to high treason, that if they can prove a case of high treason on that person should suffer the consequences. Now, back in the 1800s and before the Civil War, if you was to get caught doing something like that, and probably even a little bit after the Civil War, if you was to get caught doing something like that, it would be a death sentence. And as far as I know, on a federal military scale, it's still in their books that if you get caught doing something like this, espionage, it's still deemed as being a capital offense. In other words, they can put you to a wall and execute you, or put you in an electric chair, or use lethal injection, because the people that are in charge of these affairs, it is a very, very serious position for them to be in. And to think, if they was actually selling us out that way, how dirty-minded that it would be. And it would be, regardless of who it may be, regardless whether it's Biden's son or Biden. That's the reason why I'm steering clear from both parties. I don't want nothing to do with neither party. And if there's ever been a time that I believe that they need to bring in a Tea Party, somebody like a Ross Perot, somebody that can come up with some good solutions to our problems and not pass them back and forth to one another and fight and cause the corruption that goes on in our legislation, if they can bring in somebody like that, I'd vote for them in a heartbeat. I'd get in behind them in a heartbeat if they talk some good sense and the things that they was talking about was real and true. But as of right now, I don't have faith in either party. And I think a lot of American people feel the same way as I do. They have lost faith in the State of the Union. It was the State of the Union pertaining to the North that wanted to take over the South, that wanted to dominate the South, that wanted to tell the South towards what to do. They wound up being in a big hullabaloo about it. And there towards the last, the South surrendered, gave up, and said, okay, if you want it that bad, take it. So they got in charge. That's whenever Lincoln, the capacitation and all the other stuff, the laws, and that's whenever they freed the black man, in which they should have, and they allowed the black man to vote, in which they should have. But don't think that those feelings hasn't been passed down from one generation to another generation pertaining to the bloodlines here in America. I know that for a fact. Whenever my second from the older brother died, me being 14 years old, and my dad had such of a vendetta against the black race to the point that he wasn't willing to allow for his son's organs to be placed into anybody, because the hospital down in Memphis, Tennessee couldn't guarantee that. Couldn't guarantee that his organs have been put back into a white man or a white person's body versus a black person's body. So because of it, he said, no way, Jose, you ain't getting none of my son's parts. Now, if that ain't evilly minded, if that ain't prejudice, once more, I will kiss your tail and give you 30 minutes to draw up a crowd. Because if you was laying on that operating table and you needed an organ, I don't think that you, for surely to God, you got more sense than this towards specifically pacifying from the doctors. Well, there's no way that I'm going to take that kidney unless it come out of the same color person that I am. Or there's no way that I'm going to take that organ unless that come out of the same color person that I am. I don't think that there's nobody that stupid that would actually do something like that. Of course, I don't know. There's a lot of people in the world. You're liable to have somebody that's willing to sacrifice the ultimate sacrifice towards dying because they couldn't get the same bodily part coming out of the same color person. You got a lot of hatred in this world. You got a lot of hatred right here in America. A lot of people that's messed up. Just like that little boy strapping that suicide vest on that sincerely believes that if he dies in the name of Allah, he's going to go to heaven and be with 99 virgins. He's been lied to. He's been brainwashed. But now you try to explain that to some of these people, and they'll look at you like a deer in a headlight look.
Myriad cases of people who have done things that are less than what Donald Trump did. So I do think it's important for the country to think about selective prosecution. It's just that the record is so clear here. So if Donald Trump's attorneys want to make that argument, they need to deal with that. They can't just say it.
Let me just set the stage also for those just joining us, that the reason we're not seeing anything as we did in the state court in New York, in Manhattan, is that this is a federal court. There are no cameras. We do have a courtroom artist there. We will be seeing those sketches later, as we always see from the Supreme Court and other federal courthouses. But the other thing is that the reporters inside are not allowed to have any devices. Gabe Gutierrez, our colleague, is in the courtroom, and there's an overflow room with several other NBC and MSNBC correspondents, reporters, but they are not allowed to carry a telephone to call in, even in the hallway.
I question that. And the reason why is because whenever I was standing in front of a federal judge in Paducah, Kentucky, after me being evaluated in downtown MCC, they had an actual camera sitting there in or around where the court was. And I know for a fact that they recorded it audibly because I requested for a record of it, had to pay them money, and they made a CD pertaining to every word that was mentioned or said in that courtroom. So whenever they say that there's no gizmos or gadgets in the courtroom, in the federal courtroom, it's selected gizmos and gadgets in the federal courtroom. They're going to be covering their own tracks, and I promise you, there will be visual cameras as well as audible cameras that will be documenting everything that goes on in those proceedings. Depending upon who you are, depending upon the case, depending upon the value of the case, we'll probably make a determination on whether or not you can bring in some sort of a device and record part of the proceedings or maybe all of the proceedings versus not. They do what they want to do. The people that's in charge, they're in charge, and they do what they want to do when they want to do it, providing that they want to do it when they want to do it, depending upon the right person that to do it to. Once more, that's part of that unfair play. If you're going to allow for cameras to be in one courtroom, you ought to allow for cameras to be in all courtrooms. I must have caught the Weakley County courts unexpectedly because I brought a GoPro in there, and I know for a fact that I recorded 2 or 3 different court proceedings that now, if you go to the courtroom and you got a camera, they'll make you take it back to your car and put it in the car. They won't allow for a camera to come in there. To where whenever I first come back in 2014, they was allowing for cameras to come into courtrooms. And I did request, even though I recorded it, of a DVD or a CD being made by the Weakley County courts in Dresden, and they had it on such of a strange recording deal that I couldn't get nobody that was smart enough, even computer guys that was smart enough to identify towards being able, the format that it was recorded on, towards me being able to listen to it. You think that was done intentionally? Sure it was. Sure it was. They're going to give this set of CDs to the public, but now they're going to hang on to their CDs. They're going to be able to read their own formats. They're going to be able to listen to their own material for their own purposes. But the public, if you go up there and give them $10, $15, $20, whatever it costs to have a CD made up, odds are it's going to be on such of a format that you're not going to be able to find a device to play it on. Matter of fact, you probably won't even be able to find nobody that will be able to identify the format that it's actually recorded on. Now, is that bogus? Sure it is. Sure it's bogus. And that's what they've been doing to the American public now for quite some times. And they've also been working in the pretense of something like Secret Service, to where if you do wind up having a brush-in with them, if it's to your favor, they're not going to advertise it. If it's not to your favor and it's to their favor, they're going to put it all over the mainstream news, and your picture and your face is going to be on the front of the newspaper, and they're going to degrade you, and they're going to dehumanize you to the fullest extent of the law. That's the law that we're dealing with here in America. And that's been going on now. It's really gotten bad for the past 25 or 30 years, because I can remember whenever I was a teenager going to court over just minor issues like a traffic violation, a ticket. And I don't forgot now what judge it was. It ain't the judges that's up there now. But if something wasn't handled properly pertaining to the accurate name or the accurate address or the accurate this or the accurate that, the judge would basically throw the ticket out of court. He would throw the charge out of court because it wasn't handled right. You misspelled the guy's name. You misspelled where he lived, or etc. In other words, it used to be that the courts used to have a higher set of standards in what that they done and how that they performed, to the point that now you can go in there and somebody's name can be John, and as long as you're calling him with a J, maybe you call him Joe or James or Jerry, well, that's good enough. That's good enough. So the courts has become very, very slack, or they have up here in this area. I don't know what they're like in Indiana and Illinois and out in California, but the courts has become very, very slack in the accuracy of how things is handled. And they become very, very slick in, okay, you bought a CD that's supposed to be a recording, and yeah, you can tell by looking at the CD or the DVD that it's been burnt. But what good does it do to buy it if you don't have a player, or you can't find a computer whiz to identify what format it's on to be able to play it? You've been just as well off not to even bought the CD or the recording of the DVD. Like I said, it depends on what court it is, who's being tried, what judge it is, towards what they're going to allow and what they're not going to allow. Because up there in Paducah, Kentucky, they gave me a DVD or a CD that was right down to the T in every word that was said. In other words, they gave me a legitimate CD that I put it in my CD player and it worked. Well, how come I didn't get that response to the courts up here in Weakley County? Kind of makes you wonder, don't it? Well, you can quit wondering. Whenever Donald Trump talks about the system being rigged and about a two-tier system, it really is.
Have to come outside the courthouse, which you see is a high-rise. And I believe, Joyce Vance knows better than I. It was courtroom 13. I don't know what floor it's on. It's a relatively small courtroom, Joyce, you said, being so familiar with the 11th Circuit there. But they have to come downstairs outside before they can call with details. But as Katie just reported, the marshals are telling us that the procedure, the arraignment, has been done. So the fingerprinting, which was digital, as well as
The booking process.
the booking process.
Yeah.
And they're pleased, presumably, they said, at least the former president said he was going to plead.
I'm not sure he's
guilty.
pleaded yet, though.
I don't think we have that. We have that the booking is taking place.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, look, we're looking at this footage, as Andrew reminds us, the moment is happening. Not all moments are made for television. Jack Smith worked very quietly, and then everyone woke up to his action. And the way the federal government court system is organized, we don't get the footage. When we think of certain trials, whether it's, OJ or Gwyneth Paltrow, we think of the video shots. That's because those were not federal cases. So the federal booking process and the federal trials don't give us the camera access. But Andrea, as you remind us, this is physically happening. This is the booking of a former president, and he's now in the custody of the government he once ran.
Are there any exceptions that can be made? I mean, this is a former president who's being prosecuted for breaching national security. If there were to be an exception made to the rules against broadcasting a federal trial, would this be it?
So I think that is a great issue. I mean, the idea that you could have a trial like this and that the public wouldn't be able to see it and hear it in real time. And just imagine during COVID, the Chief Justice of the United States made exceptions so that you could hear and see things that you wouldn't be able to see. In terms of public confidence, in terms of defeating this idea of conspiracy theories and what's happening in court.
You made a good point about COVID, because they was doing satellite recordings, satellite courts, to where the judge never had to come in contact with the client. A matter of fact, some of your doctors and nurses, depending upon who they was, they went ahead and took that type of a deal to where you didn't, like, let's say that it comes snow and ice and you couldn't get out of your house. I've called my doctor before, and because I had an appointment set up, and she went ahead and took the call, a video conference call, and we sat there and looked at one another for 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever, and then she dropped the phone, and I hung up the phone, and everything was hunky-dory, just like I drove to McKenzie and done it myself in person. So once more, it's based upon who it is, what it's about, and who wants to do whatever that they want to do. And Tommy Moore, I've heard him say many a time, well, I'm the judge. I'm the judge. I can do as I wish. I'm the judge. Which, figuratively speaking, you can. But there's still a set of guidelines pertaining to what a judge can do, what a judge can't do, regardless whether it's a local case, state case, federal case, whatever. And those are the issues that the American courts has gotten away from. And that makes it very, very biased and unjust. It makes it corrupt.
Letting people just see what is happening, I think, is so important.
But I've never seen a video camera in a federal trial.
So in a federal trial, you would need, in this case, you would need to have the Chief Justice making that exception.
Of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And could you see any circumstances under which that happened?
Well, this is one where it's like, this case is different.
How does that even get requested? Is it a motion filed by the media organizations? Is it a motion, does it have to come from the defense or the prosecution?
What if the defense and the prosecution agree that it was in the public interest? They might both have interests, separate and coinciding interests in that.
Absolutely. So the Department of Justice can make an application, the defense can make an application, but ultimately there still is the court that can decide whether it thinks that it has to make its own decision.
Now you'll have a hotshot attorney or a hotshot judge to tell you, oh, it's all based upon state rights. And each state operates differently. Well, how can the law operate in 15 different ways based upon the same type of case, the same type of crime, but because that judge wants to handle things in a different way? How can that be just? There's really only one law book. It's confusion. It's confusion. And it's based upon privileged information. It's based upon being biased. It's based upon somebody holding a vendetta against another person. All the above. All the above.
Regardless of what two parties in an individual case think.
And the press, just to be clear, the precedent we have runs against it. Full disclosure, as a journalist, I think we should have the cameras in there. Let's see. I mean, that's a very journalistic baseline view.
As a member of this country,
of the member of the
you wanna
society.
see what's going on because we're so divided, and I think it's important to allow everybody to witness this process.
I think you're absolutely right. You put it well. I just want to be clear so the viewers understand, not only is there the federal precedent against it that Andrew alluded to, but the Supreme Court, which fashions itself as neutral.
Especially with us being uncertain about the fairness of the courts with the individual that's being heard right now pretending to go into court. I agree that these things should be handled in front of the cameras. That way there is no question at hand towards who said what their intent was, what their, how they approached that person with that question or with that answer, that we can have our own rights to make our own determinations.
And makes the final rule, has a very well documented antipathy towards cameras in their own courtroom, and so they are doubly against this kind of thing, even with the interesting hypothetical I think you posed.
Now, they do permit audio, and during COVID, they permitted real-time audio, as Andrew just alluded to, but even audio of this would be helpful to the public to understand that we hope that this is going to be a fair trial. Everyone is innocent until proved guilty, and there could be no better ratification of our rules of law and democracy than to give the former president of the United States a fair trial in every direction.
So let's go inside that courtroom if we can, Joyce Vance, right now. We know that the booking has taken place. We know, we mentioned this before, this is Donald Trump not getting his picture taken. They're going to use something they've already got. They've got his hand electronically. He's not going to have any ink on his fingers. But inside that courtroom that you know, describe that for us, but also this process, which we are told is very straightforward and generally very quick.
It is straightforward. It is fast. Typically, the defendant will waive the reading of the indictment. In this case, it's a long indictment. That would take a while if Trump insists on having it. And then the main event is his entry of a plea. And at this point, it will be a plea of not guilty. That's how the arraignment proceeding works. Very likely an agreement has been reached in advance between Trump's lawyers and prosecutors about what the condition of his release will be. He will likely be released on his recognizance, and they will not require posting of a bond because, as Katie's previously noted, he does have Secret Service protection. That means he's not a flight risk, and there's very little reason to obtain a bond. You know, folks may find that as unsatisfying in this situation, but it's important to note, especially in light of the conversation y'all have been having about the importance of this not being a political event, that Trump should be treated like anyone else. And to the extent that the judge is comfortable that he will return for successive appearances in court, that he is not a flight risk in any way, then these sort of minimal sort of procedures necessary to secure his reappearance are all that's warranted at this stage.
Glenn Kushner, what procedures do you think the court could, or the prosecution or the defense, provide to try to show the public what is going on inside, other than we will have our correspondents reporting immediately after the procedure ends and we will see the artwork? But is there anything more that can be done by the attorneys on both sides?
Andrea, I mean, I think I join the sentiments of everybody there in saying some transparency for the American people about what's going on in that courtroom, I think is of vital national interest, quite frankly. We want people to have confidence in the fairness of the process and the reliability of the result. And in this day and age of propaganda and disinformation, particularly being put out by the defendant himself and many of his, supporters, it's important for people to be able to see with their own eyes the evidence as it unfolds, or at least hear it if we can get an audio recording or an audio real-time audio stream approved. I also think that's probably unlikely, but can I just build on something Joyce said real quickly about wanting to treat Donald Trump the way we would treat anybody else? I agree with her that it's unlikely the judge will impose any serious limitations or restrictions on his movement pending trial. Of course, I think it's fair to ask the question, you know, when we have thousands of pre-trial detainees being jailed pending trial in jurisdictions all across this country because judges have determined each one poses a danger to the community, and a judge has to reach that conclusion by a preponderance of the evidence, a fairly high evidentiary standard. You know, do all of those people pose a greater threat to the community than Donald Trump, with not only what we saw him do on January 6th, but his incessant posts and comments that in a very real sense jeopardize or put in harm's way judges, prosecutors, their families, witnesses, grand jurors, trial jurors. And if anybody else who was similarly situated and had done the things Donald Trump did, like violate our nation's espionage laws and then obstruct justice to keep those documents, that classified information and national defense information, to himself unlawfully, if anybody else had done that, would they enjoy pretrial release, or would they be deemed a risk to the community, and would there be a conversation about what the judge should do with that person pending trial? I don't expect we'll see it, but I don't think it can be said that we're treating Donald Trump the way we're treating other people who are similarly situated.
We have some new video. It's just into us that it was back at Doral when Donald Trump was getting ready to leave and come over to the courtroom, which you have been seeing now. So there's the picture at Doral and the former president of the United States getting in there. I wonder if, and I don't know what the procedure would be, if they wanted to make a motion and it went before Chief Justice Roberts, whether or not to open up this trial, what Donald Trump would make of that. Would Donald Trump, who has built a career off of being in front of the camera, of garnering attention, and would he say to his lawyers, let's try to make the argument for it?
So I would, this is a prediction, but I think he would say no, because if you notice what his attorney said, what he's going to do tonight, he's in control of that situation. What's going to happen in trial is he is not in control of that situation, and there will be a slew of witnesses who are his employees, his attorneys, his voice, text messages that will be quite damning. But that's not a reason not to have an open trial. I do think that if you're trying to deal with a problem of conspiracy theories and people who are not fact-based.
Let's go forward real quick. Let's see if they can throw anything else on us real quick that looks interesting or different. Because this is just them chit-chatting about the situation. Or maybe the commentators would change over. They usually change over every hour. There'll be different commentators. Oh, he's coming out or did come out.
Of the former president getting into the motorcade, a motorcade that has been described as very much like a presidential motorcade. They shut down that side of the highway, and obviously couldn't be more different from what's happening outside the courthouse, what's happening inside the courthouse. The seriousness of this moment, the first former president charged with federal crimes. Give us your thought from an historian's perspective of what we're watching today.
Well, you're absolutely right, Chris. With his sense of showmanship, he's making this look as if this is triumphant. This is someone who's charged with federal crimes, which could send him to prison, and which are big infringements of the Espionage Act, possible obstruction of justice, 37 counts. You know, it used to be in our society that when someone was accused of something, not necessarily a sense of shame because he is innocent until proven guilty, but at least some sense that this is not a day of celebration. And this is one reason why I agree with what Andrew said and what Katie said and others in our group, that it's astounding that there is almost no transparency about this court appearance today. We're in a situation which is going to be a problem for American life, and that is that many people expected this trial to take place in Washington, D.C. Suddenly, they learned it was going to be in South Florida. The judge looks as if it's going to be a presiding judge, Judge Aileen Cannon, who at an earlier stage of this process made a number of rulings for which she was reprimanded. People need to see and hear what's going on.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Let's go on forward here.
So far, no problems there. It seems to be relatively peaceful. Let's bring in our panel for this hour. Ari Melber, MSNBC chief legal correspondent, is back with us, as is Andrew Weissman, former lead prosecutor in special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance and Neil Katyal, former U.S. acting solicitor general, and attorney Tim Parlatore. He served as former President Trump's lawyer on the special counsel investigations until his resignation almost 1 month ago. So we're all here, and let's pick up on that conversation where we left off so we can keep it going. I open the floor to you, Andrew Weissman, because you still have some questions.
Tim, I was trying to make sure that people understood what you were saying, because my understanding of the grand jury rules is that unless you, were a witness, you wouldn't be in the grand jury. I thought that was against the law, actually, that you could be outside the grand jury room. So were you recounting what you experienced as a witness, or is it in some other context?
No, it's been well reported that the original subpoena that was to the office of Donald J. Trump, they wanted a custodian of records to appear. None was available because the organization didn't have a custodian of records. And we made the tactical decision that I would go into the grand jury because they specifically wanted to talk about the searches, the subsequent searches that my team undertook at the other Trump properties. And so I went into the grand jury so that I could speak to them directly about that. So that's what happened. And it was something the prosecutors did not want me to come into the grand jury. They fought it. And ultimately, they had to bring me in. And during that period that I was in the grand jury, they did commit these multiple errors.
So we have a plea, we're told, if I can interrupt you for just a second, we have a plea from Donald Trump. It is as expected. He has pled not guilty to this voluminous set of 37 charges that are outlined in a 49-page indictment. We have Ken, who has been inside the courtroom. He is literally making his way to the camera. Katie, I know you wanted to get in.
Tim, I have a follow-up question for you on that. Are you expecting to be a witness when this goes to trial?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So how will you make the argument of prosecutorial misconduct?
I'm sorry, say it again?
So how will the argument
I
of
couldn't hear you interrupting me, so.
I'm so sorry. How will the argument of prosecutorial misconduct be made if you're not going to be a witness in trial?
Well, the parts that I witnessed were all in a transcript, so that you don't need me to testify about what happened. You have a transcript, and that transcript will be submitted to the judge. Plus, issues of prosecutorial misconduct are legal issues that will go before the judge in a pretrial setting. That's not necessarily something, except in rare circumstances, that would ever actually be presented to the jury. I expect that there'll be a pretrial motion to dismiss because of prosecutorial misconduct, or in the alternative, to disqualify those prosecutors who engaged in the misconduct.
And you had other instances. We talked last week in Washington about some of the other instances of alleged prosecutorial misconduct. And I might have to interrupt you because our reporter is just about to come to the microphone and to the cameras. This will be our first report from Ken Delaney, our justice correspondent, Mr. Parlatore, about what happened inside, because as we've all been discussing, there were no cameras, there was no audio. They were not allowed to bring devices in, so Ken has rushed down to the camera. He's about to appear and give us the first indication. If you want to start, I just a caution, I might have to interrupt you because we've all been waiting for these first words from the courtroom, as you understand.
I understand. Yeah. Plus, I think there's a little delay in the audio here.
Yeah. No, I'm very sorry about that. But if you could tell us what other issues of prosecutorial misconduct do you think the defense should and will most likely be presenting in these pretrial motions?
Well, I think that there's going to be discovery conducted first, because while you certainly have...
Now, as I cautioned, We'll bring you back in just a moment. Ken Delanian joins us from outside the courthouse. Ken, tell us what happened in there. We've all been waiting.
Andrea, Donald Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, pled not guilty on his behalf. He said, "We most certainly enter a plea of not guilty." When asked by the magistrate judge how he pleads, it was a very pro forma, very bare bones proceeding in there. It lasted probably around 5 minutes. I left after Mr. Trump's plea was entered, so I didn't hear his co-defendant, Walt Nada, who we assume also pleads not guilty. I can tell you that the government was represented by David Harbach of the Special Counsel's Office, Jay Bratt, who's the chief of the Counter Espionage Section of the Justice Department, who's been working on this case, and Julie Edelstein of the National Security Division. Mr. Trump is represented by, as I said, Todd Blanche, one of his lawyers from New York, who has been admitted to enter this case by Judge Cannon, and he said he'll be doing this permanently, so he's going to represent Donald Trump in this case. And also Chris Keyes, who is a Florida lawyer who has been sort of off again, on again with the Trump team. The magistrate judge welcomed everyone to the Southern District of Florida. Mr. Trump sat stone-faced. He's wearing a blue suit and a red tie at the table with his lawyers and with his co-defendant, Walt Nada. And they waived a formal reading of the indictment. So it was a really pro forma, bare bones affair, Andrea.
And Andrew Weissman, you've been nodding when at least the description of who the prosecutors were. Could you give us a quick thumbnail on those three prosecutors?
Sure, that's quite an experienced team. Julie, the national security person, has a lot of experience with these types of cases and is particularly adept at the law. Jay Bratt, somebody we've heard about for quite some time. He famously was in June at Mar-a-Lago with FBI agents when a lot of the issues in the case arose with respect to whether they could look at or not look at certainly areas.
Ken, what are we expecting next? Is the judge going to schedule something for soon after this?
Yeah, well, so what would have happened after the plea? Obviously, I left the courtroom, but they would talk about conditions moving forward of release. Obviously, he's not expected to be detained. So the magistrate judge would impose any potential conditions and then schedule a next appearance. And I'm sure you've reported, because I called it in hours ago, that before the hearing, Mr. Trump and Mr. Nada were both processed by the federal marshals, and we understand that Mr. Trump was fingerprinted through a digital fingerprint system, but his mugshot was not taken. They used an existing photo of Mr. Trump as the official booking photo.
Can you give us, Ken, some atmospherics? I mean, this obviously is a historic moment, but we could not see it. We'll get some sketches, I assume. There, for example, were some reports that Jack Smith was in the room. Did you see him? What else can you tell us just about the mood in the room, Donald Trump's reaction to all this? Yeah, I think you said he was stone-faced, but what else can you tell us about being in that room and who was in that room?
So, Chris, remember, I was in the overflow room watching this on a really lousy video feed. So I saw someone that I believe looked like Jack Smith sitting in the front row of the gallery, and reporters were consulting among ourselves whether we believe that actually is Jack Smith. We think it was. A federal marshal spokesman told us that Jack Smith is in fact here. So we think Jack Smith was in the room. I didn't see Mr. Trump react at all. He sat stone-faced. He was not writing. He didn't seem to have a pen in his hand. The lawyers did all the talking. The magistrate judge was very friendly, and it was kind of a loose atmosphere. Honestly, the most drama of the day was which reporters would get admitted into the courtroom. There was a lot of sturm and drang that went into that. There were lotteries. There was separate waves of reporters, and a few members of the public, maybe a dozen members of the public, admitted to this courtroom. And so, other than that, it was much shorter, honestly, than even I expected it would be. And we all know these first appearances and arraignments are very bare bones and very rudimentary, but this one felt like it was even more so. And again, no reaction whatsoever that I observed from the former president.
I know you had to run out of there really quickly, but did you get any information about a date for when this case goes back to Cannon, when this case is back under her jurisdiction?
No, honestly, as soon as I heard the plea, I headed for the elevators. We have other people in there, though, who will be coming out shortly and reporting on all that information, Katie.
What about the demeanor of Walt Nada, who was there Today, Kelly O'Connell, our White House reporter, Kelly O'Donnell, rather, O'Donnell, our White House reporter, is reporting that he's there not only as a co-defendant, but as a personal aide. He's staffing him today.
Yeah, it's such a tragic story with Mr. Nada, who's caught up in all this and had a chance to plead guilty and cooperate with the government and turned it down and is represented by a lawyer that's been paid for essentially by Mr. Trump's political action committee. I didn't see really any discernible reaction from him. He seemed a little more animated. His body was moving, his head a little more than Mr. Trump, who really sat stone-faced and didn't move much at all, sort of rock solid, sitting at the defense table. But look, neither man, while I was in the courtroom, uttered a word, and all the speaking was done by the lawyers.
Did you hear anything in your conversations around the courtroom about this ongoing effort by Team Trump to try to hire some more lawyers?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, just from my reporting that I've been doing down here in Florida for the past week, I know that they've been interviewing many lawyers, and I know of at least one very prominent defense attorney who turned them down, and it's been an ongoing effort. None of the people that we believe they've been interviewing were in that courtroom today, so it really does appear that if they're attempting to add other local Florida-based lawyers who practice in federal court, so far that hasn't happened. The lawyers that we saw in there are lawyers that have been with him for some time.
And Ken, this is Ari here. First of all, I think we all thank you for trying to make soup out of this water because you had limited access and we were applying you the questions. You were also closer to this than most people in America, so we appreciate that. I'm curious both from the overflow room you were in and as well as before and after you're down there. This is a person in Donald Trump who has previously posted and talked about summoning a type of resistance or revolution. We covered earlier today some of his allies talking about a, quote, war footing for this and all of the dangers associated with that. What are you seeing, having gone in, come out, and also being outside now in this area and that wider aspect of this? And in any way, did you get any hint that that's affecting anyone doing this proceeding, or was it all, as you've been telling us, running smoothly on the inside?
Look, inside this courthouse, which is a rather modern courthouse and sort of impregnable. I mean, it just doesn't, it's not a kind of a building that you would worry about security when you're inside. So there really wasn't any kind of concern. We were all looking out the window, obviously, at the growing crowd of Trump supporters that were assembled out front. And at one point, we saw a group of senior Trump aides, his spokesman, Stephen Chung, and some other people kind of wander out before the crowd. I saw one woman who I believe was one of his top fundraisers, taking pictures of the crowd. So we did see that occur, and that was a sign to us that Mr. Trump had arrived at the courthouse. But in terms of the influence on the proceeding, you know, it seemed like every federal courthouse security officer in this building was called into work today, and a lot of people from Washington. So there were people in tactical gear, people in regular courthouse garb. There was a lot of security, and in fact, you know, there was a phone that we were using on one of the courtroom, the unoccupied courtroom floors, that when I went up to use it to report something later in the day, it was blocked off, and I was told to turn around and go back. So they really locked this building down, and there really wasn't much of a concern about security.
Ken Delaney, and what about bail conditions? Any word on those?
No, that's something that would have transpired after I left. You know, it's possible that some kind of bail could be set. Obviously, no one thinks that there's any circumstances under which Mr. Trump would be detained, or Mr. Nada for that matter, but it's possible that some kind of bail conditions will be set, and we'll just have to wait and see what those, I would assume that by now, a lot of that's been worked out, so hopefully we'll find out very soon.
Ken Delaney and whetting our appetite for us.
I'm going to now still making soup out of water.
Making soup. It reminds me of the Arrested Development episode, Hot Ham Water. Anyone? Any fan of that show here? Yes. Classic. All right, let's go back to our team of lawyers who've been standing by for us. I'm curious to go back to Tim Parlatore. You're talking about prosecutorial misconduct being alleged here. Beyond that, if the case doesn't get dismissed, What is going to be the argument for Donald Trump's team? Are they going to go hard on the politics of it, the partisan nature of it, to claim that this is all a witch hunt, as Donald Trump has been doing publicly? Or is it going to end up being more of a traditional defense where you focus on the merits of the case and really nail down at least one member of the jury to try and sow some doubt in their mind, because you need the entire jury to be unanimous here?
Correct, and a lot of that is going to depend on what the evidence shows. They don't have discovery yet, so they will have to go through all that and form what their theory is going to be based on that. A lot of it's going to go into jury selection of what type of jurors they get. And really, there's a lot of tactical decision making that has to happen between now and then. That really to say what the strategy is going to be before any discovery has been issued as to the jury trial, that's not something that I would really want to opine on just yet. I do think that there's a lot of issues beyond just the prosecutorial misconduct. There are other potential pretrial issues to go through. Certainly the issue of Evans' notes and whether that was appropriately turned over, sufficiency of the search warrant, and other things. So there's a lot here that they're going to have to go through.
Would you expect a motion to suppress those notes?
Absolutely, absolutely. The initial litigation over that, but based on the fact that it's attorney-client privilege and that the crime fraud exception should not have been applied to it.
Why not?
Because crime fraud exception is a very narrow exception that really doesn't fit with this case, because what we're talking about here is communications between an attorney and a client about a subpoena and what you are and are not allowed to do in response to a subpoena. Those are the kind of conversations that you want to have. And what Jack Smith has done here, which is a very dangerous precedent to try and set, is to not only pierce those conversations, but then to actually charge in the indictment questions that he asked the attorney. That's totally improper. Because ultimately, if you have the full context of that conversation, what Donald Trump is saying there is, I remember when Hillary Clinton got her subpoena and David Kendall deleted 33,000 emails. Nobody got in trouble there. Are we allowed to do the same thing? That's really what the questions are. And those are the type of questions you want the client to ask the attorney so that we can properly advise them, no, we can't do that. And then as long as the client then says, okay, that is not an improper conversation. That's not the kind of conversation that should be disclosed and certainly shouldn't be charged. Now, I do see a potential very narrow crime fraud exception to the issue of when Evan intended to do the search, because their theory about Walt moving the boxes before Evan got there, the part where Evan says, I'm going to do the search on this day, is relevant to that piece. But the remainder of it, it goes far beyond, that very narrow exception. And I think that ultimately, when you're given an opportunity to fully litigate the issue, you're going to get a different result.
Wasn't
One thing you have to
litigated
remember,
in front of
when litigating these,
I was just going to ask, was it litigated in front of a federal judge in
this,
D.C. already?
Not exactly, because it was litigated, but because it was in the context of grand jury proceedings, the grand jury secrecy rules applied, and so therefore the prosecution filed their motion with the judge, which we responded to, but we weren't allowed to read their motion. We weren't allowed to see what the arguments they were raising were.
Hey, Tim, Martin Melber here. I just want to jump in. Just jumping in, and thanks again for joining us on a big news day. I'm curious what your reaction is as we look at this today, just broadening out big picture. You represented Donald Trump. He was your client in this case. He's just been booked. First time a former president has ever been put under the arrest and custody of the United States federal government, which he recently led. And part of the reason, which will be debated, as you say, there'll be many more proceedings after this, but part of the reason is a lot of evidence that he lied to your legal team, the team you were part of, repeatedly, put lawyers in jeopardy. Clearly Trump lawyer one, Mr. Corcoran, who you referred to. Whether you were in or out of that group, time will tell, or you can tell us. But I'm just curious, big picture, when you look at this, do you think if he had just not lied so much to you in the government, he might not even be booked today? I mean, does any part of you say, gosh, I just wish my client told the truth instead of lied so much, because this all might have been avoided.
Well, the one thing I can tell you is that Donald Trump never lied to me. And so
I said legal team.
as to,
you know, we can lawyer it up today. I said legal
right,
team.
but
Yeah.
I understand. I'm just talking about what I personally experienced. He certainly never lied to me. If these allegations are true, you know, on the other side, you know, that's something that, look, when I meet with a client the first time, I tell them, you know, you may have seen on TV where lawyers, they don't want to know the truth. That's, you know, great in John Grissom books and things like that. I need to know everything. Tell me where the bodies are buried. Tell me where the landmines are so I don't accidentally step on them. And so I can't speak to that specific part of this case. You know, I came into, you know, the Mar-a-Lago side of this thing a little bit later. I was initially just on the January 6th case. So I can't speak to that portion of it. I do think, you know, that this is the type of thing that really from both sides, had there been more communications, more honest communications from the beginning, things could have probably been avoided. And I'm not going to just lay the blame on just one side or the other, but certainly, you know, from what I saw, the DOJ team wasn't really negotiating or communicating the way that normal assistant U.S. attorneys would either.
Tim, you've been great
I
spending
do
so
think
much
that
time.
this entire case is avoidable. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good thing for you to say, that you think it's avoidable, and we appreciate your time,
That is
sir.
a personal tragedy.
Thank you so much, Tim. We do appreciate you spending so much time. Let me go to Neil Katyal because we don't know. We're hoping one of our other folks will come out of the courtroom and give us some idea of what happens next and what the magistrate had to say. But what are you going to be looking for? What are the key moments that people should know are coming now that these charges have been formally made and the president has been booked and is in that courtroom right now?
Yeah, so I think the headline coming out of today, as we knew, is Donald Trump is now officially under arrest. He has now been indicted twice, he's been arrested twice, and he's been impeached twice. And of course, in this proceeding in Florida, he'll be entitled to the presumption of innocence. But if his defense is what we just heard from Mr. Parlatore, I don't think that he's got much of a defense. So I expect the first set of proceedings to be some sort of challenge to the indictment, a motion to quash the indictment, to throw it out because of this alleged prosecutorial misconduct. And it was notable to me that the only thing was...
See, you sit and you listen to the news and you hear all their hypotheticals. I don't think. Well, I think it's this way. I think it's that way. I think it should be here. I think it should be there. That's just the media and how they hype everything up in all their hypotheticals. They're trying to gather up an audience. Looking for ratings. Higher the ratings, the more it costs for the insurance companies and for people putting on ads on that particular TV station, the more it's going to cost because, oh, we reached out to this many people during this event, that many people during that event.
Roads were physically blocked off by bike racks in order to ensure that the streets were not occupied by people.
In other words, the media has become a business. It's a business. And it's based upon how well that they can throw it out there to the public and gather up an audience. It's called ratings. The higher the ratings, the more it's going to cost Kellogg's to put a cereal commercial on MSNBC. And it's also based upon prime time of whether or not you're going to play your commercial at 3 o'clock in the morning, with which most people are asleep, or if you're going to play your commercial at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a business. Media, news, has become a business. And that's not what news originally was.
motorcade came through. We're going to keep on watching this to see if anything else develops. We'll also watch to see if Donald Trump makes an unscheduled stop somewhere to give remarks. You never know. I do want to go to you, Joyce Vance, to talk a little bit about what we did not get from that arraignment, and that's a next court date. Can you explain what's going on?
Sure. So it's not surprising that nothing further has been scheduled. The judge may issue a scheduling order on her own. She may simply wait for the parties to begin filing motions and then schedule anything that needs to be assessed pre-trial. But likely one of the early steps that gets taken here is the government will want to sit down and have a conversation about CIPA and how classified materials will be handled. We're a little bit less formalistic down here than they are in New York, so it's no surprise that Magistrate Judge Jonathan Goodman, he's the duty judge. That means he's the judge who's handling, in essence, everything that comes up right now in the courthouse. And he wouldn't have been in charge of scheduling for Judge Cannon. That likely falls to the magistrate judge that she's normally paired with, Bruce Reinhardt. And so it's likely that in the next days or weeks, they will come up with some sort of schedule for what happens next and how they'd like the lawyers to proceed.
Explain what Garrett was talking about in terms of a limited no contact order between Donald Trump and the witnesses, that he'll have to communicate with these witnesses between by using counsel, by using attorneys. A lot of the people that are witnesses work for Donald Trump. There's lawyers, there's Secret Service, there's aides at Mar-a-Lago. Walt Nauta, who's a co-conspirator here, is Donald Trump's personal valet. How does that work?
Yeah, I think Garrett's assessment that this is a little bit tough to enforce is spot on. I don't know if this is a routine order that's entered in the Southern District. In all criminal cases, it's not something that I would use barring a situation where there were articulable concerns about a defendant trying to obstruct or influence other witnesses or victims. Here we're told the government did not ask for this order, that it was simply implemented by the court. Likely this will be something that Trump's lawyers will want to challenge going forward. I think we'll have to wait and see how this one plays out.
Joyce Vance, thank you very much. To everybody who joined us over this past 4 hours, all of our very accomplished and intelligent guests who helped us understand what was going on, thank you very much. Also, thank you to my colleagues Chris Jansing and Andrea Mitchell. That'll wrap up our special coverage of the indictment of Donald Trump. Deadline White House picks up that breaking news coverage right now.
Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York for the first time in our country's 200.
Let's go forward. Let's see if anything develops new.
The date he went into custody is a date for the rule of law. So I think, number one, that. Number two, why are we here? It's not just because of crime. Many crimes go unsolved. Investigators can tell you that. Prosecution is not only about crime, it is always about evidence. We are here on this case. People say, why this one, not that one? Because I think we can see today, more than other cases, how Donald Trump repeatedly, brazenly, and flagrantly left the evidence of his now indicted crimes, his alleged criminality. So he left fingerprints quite literally on the documents. He left fingerprints on the lawyer meetings, which are now evidence against him. He left fingerprints in public while proclaiming that he could break law.
Bill Clinton's fingerprints was all over what went on down in Waco pertaining to Mount Carmel with the Davidians and the 51-day standoff, and basically the Oklahoma bombing too. Bill Clinton's fingerprints was all over that. We ain't seen no major trial on that again. No reopening investigation trial. Let's go over here. Let's be fair-minded. Let's go to other news stations, see what they got to say.
To help pay for your funeral.
Hikes in July or September.
In New York, he'll have to be dealing with Alvin Bragg and the New York State Attorney General, investigation into his financial handling that a civil trial there in New York, a backdrop that's not too friendly to him. But this is quite the opposite here. Your thoughts?
Right, and it actually makes sense on some level for the president, former president, that is, to politicize this because it is going to be a South Florida jury. He did carry Florida twice, which means that based on who the jury pool is going to be, there's a very good chance that there are going to be people on that jury who voted for Donald Trump. Maybe even half or more of the jurors will have voted for Donald Trump. So to the extent that the political clashes with the legal, it does make sense for him to get people, particularly in South Florida, to be fired up and to some extent outraged by the charges.
You know, there are a lot of charges, though. There are a lot of counts. There are 37 counts. I know all it takes is one juror to say, no, this doesn't add up to me, not guilty, it's over. But that's 37 times for a single or other jurors to do that. That's an uphill battle still, is it not?
It is, and as indictments go, I've read a lot of indictments in my career, this is a very strong indictment, not just because it's detailed, but because the pillars of the case, if you will, are all very strong. I look at every case as the building blocks, or how would I as a prosecutor get to beyond a reasonable doubt. And in every case as a prosecutor, you're dealt a hand. Sometimes you're dealt a weak hand, sometimes you're dealt a strong hand. For example, if your key eyewitness happens to be, say, a convicted felon or someone with very poor communication skills, there's nothing as a prosecutor you can do about that. But in this case, the three pillars of the case are basically the testimony of Evan Corcoran, his former lawyer, who's a former federal prosecutor, Princeton University graduate, former lawyer for Donald Trump himself, so someone who's going to presumably have excellent communication skills and who's going to be difficult to portray as biased. The other pillar of the case, or the next pillar, the surveillance videos, hard to attack the credibility of surveillance videos. And then you have the FBI agents who executed the search warrant. They'll be tough to attack on credibility grounds as well. So Jack Smith, from a strictly legal standpoint, from a strictly prosecutorial standpoint, has a pretty strong hand here.
Let me ask you about this bond order that the former president signed and dated as of 3:27 p.m. today that calls on him to have no contact with any witnesses in the case. And the judge apparently kept going back and forth on this with...
Let's go down here to this news agency.
Patience, everyone. Professor Jacobson at Legal Insurrection, please make that a part of your daily reading. Professor, thank you for your measured insight. I'm grateful.
Great, thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And please, everyone, Legal Insurrection, I've been a fan for years. Coming up next, Lee Smith. We'll get some big picture analysis and perspective of how all of these hoaxes have been going on for, gosh, I mean, we're almost coming up on a decade now. Good night. Talk with Lee Smith next. Mike Slater, First TV, for the word.
The anti-communist men of...
We done covered that.
Tell me a little bit more about what he said. Were you inside when he was there? What did he say?
So he was in there, he was addressing what was going on in the case where he pled not guilty to the many charges that are being brought up against him. I mean, also, and we sang him a happy birthday since tomorrow is the former president's birthday. But, you know, he said he's going to be making a speech at some point earlier today about what went on at the court, so we'll have to stay tuned.
Perfect, thank you so much. So there you heard it. This is a state representative who was here, but as you can see, there are many Cuban Americans here, a lot of them extremely excited to see former President Donald Trump, and this is just another gathering compared to the gathering that was happening at the courthouse with thousands of Trump supporters. Back to you.
Hey, Leo, there was a prayer that was said inside the restaurant with President Trump. They prayed over him, and they prayed that communism wouldn't be welcomed into our shores by the Democrat Party, which is what many believe the Democrats are doing to this country. And of course, the Cubano community, they know very well the dangers and the cancer that communism is. Do you think it's why President Trump is so well received in places like Miami?
Absolutely. I mean, as a Venezuelan American myself, I know firsthand how Venezuelans view President Trump and how they view communism and socialism, and also Cuban Americans. I mean, they've gone through it and they're very concerned that this is happening in this country as well.
Leo, do me a favor. Can you see anybody around you that perhaps was inside the restaurant, maybe got a picture or a selfie with the president? And he bought a round of food for
let's
folks.
check and see.
Yeah. Go ahead. Just see
let's
what
see.
you can
Let's
find
see if
behind
anybody.
you.
Hi, te puedo entrevistar para Newsmax. You speak English? You speak English? Were you here when President Trump walked in?
Surely was.
What did you think?
Oh, he's the best. We need him back in 2024. There's only one president that can save this country. That's President Donald J. Trump.
What did you think when you saw him? Were you surprised?
Oh, I have seen him a couple of times, and every time he comes to Miami, I see him. I always follow him.
Did you know he was coming here?
Oh, yeah.
How did you know?
I figure it out. Versailles is the only place where all the Cubans come, and every Cuban support Trump.
So there you heard it. A lot of people had that gut feeling like her and came here to Versailles to see former President Donald Trump, even though this was not a scheduled visit. She just thought that he would visit the Cuban Americans here. Back to you.
Wow. Leo Feldman, man, thank you. It was great to meet you, and thank you for your time here on the Chris Salcedo Show and part of Newsmax's coverage of President Trump and his unscheduled stop at a restaurant in Miami. Heading out now to the airport. That's what you're seeing on the right side of your screen. Let me bring in Bernard Carrick. Bernie Carrick, first off, I was struck watching President Trump. He just stops at this restaurant and he starts shaking hands. He starts talking with folks, poses for a photo with Jorge Masvidal, the WFC champion and fighter. UFC champion. I'm getting my wrestling and fighting mixed up. Anyhow, so he stops there and he discusses with the folks what's going on. Everything's going to be fine. Going to give you a speech, and then buys everybody a round of food. It is classic President Trump. Yes. Bernie Carrick, can you hear me?
Yeah,
go ahead, sir. Go ahead, pick it up from there. I got you.
I was watching, and I got to tell you, Chris, the whole thing is appalling to me. The whole thing is disgusting. You know, the fact that he had to go down there, that he's with his former naval officer, a naval member, it's tearing my heart out that these Marxists, that's what they are. You know, these prosecutors, Jack Smith is nothing but an attack officer for the Attorney General and for the President. This is sickening to watch. I feel like I'm in Cuba in the Fidel Castro days, and that is exactly what those people in Miami are talking about. That's why he's got so much support there. And the Cubano arena down in Miami, those people despise communism. They left communism to come here to a free nation, and they're watching this thing go on in exactly the same manner that happened in Cuba and in other countries around the world, and nobody knows it better than they do.
Well, Bernie, you're in New Jersey. I think you're going to be there waiting for President Trump to touch down. He's coming your way. And I wasn't sure if my information is correct. Are you going to be able to have a conversation with the president today? And if so, if that is true, if my information... Go ahead.
I'll see him later when he arrives. I'm about 25 minutes from Bedminster now. I should get there in about a half hour, I guess. And I'm sure I'll see him later when he gets there.
Well, Bernie, I got to ask you too. We're getting reports that the Federal Bureau of Investigation actually redacted information on recordings. These ideas, we were told about these recordings that exist of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden colluding with this Russian oligarch to get their payoffs, and that the FBI had that information and they redacted it from those FD 1023s to give to Congress. They tried to hide the fact that these recordings exist. As a law enforcement official, can you give me your evaluation of an FBI that would do such a thing?
Yeah, they would get locked up in the real world. That's what would happen. That's what would happen. What they're doing is they're concealing and suppressing evidence in a crime, in a substantial crime, whether it was the president or not. If a municipal or state police officer or an FBI agent, if an FBI agent in any other case concealed evidence like that to protect a criminal target, they would be locked up. They would get charged, they would get prosecuted, and they'd go to prison.
Right, and we have to put the qualifier in there that the evidence that we are being told about, these recordings, were alleged by Senator Chuck Grassley on the Senate floor yesterday, and that members that we're getting word now that portion of the FD 1023s was quote unquote redacted and was trying to be hidden allegedly by the FBI from members of Congress. So we have to make sure we put that in there as well. I am hoping that Republicans remain dogged as they are pursuing all of the alleged corruption of Joe Biden and his family, that they also are equally dogged in pursuing alleged corruption of the FBI and the alleged corruption of the Department of Injustice. So, Bernie Kerik, any final thoughts as President Trump rolls your way? What were you planning on discussing with him once you do speak with him tonight?
Well, listen, I want to, he already knows this. I'm an extreme supporter of his. I've known this guy since 1992 or 1993. You're not getting any better person, especially for this day and age, to fight for this country than him. None. I know a bunch of the other candidates. I like them. Some are really good guys. The bottom line is, we're at a critical stage in this country, and I think he understands that. He knows it, and we need him at the helm to make this turn, to basically hammer against this communism, socialism, Marxist ideology that these people, starting with the Bidens, are trying to push into the country.
Bernie Kerik, thank you very much. Appreciate the time, as always, here on the Chris Salcedo Show. Folks, it's breaking news right now on your screen. You see President Trump's motorcade. It is making its way out of Miami, out to the airport, where President Trump will board Trump Force One. He's heading to...
Even if there is an argument somewhere in here that taking these documents were legal or not violations, and I don't know what those arguments are, these are still highly sensitive documents that were taken without any notification of the intelligence community, were stored in bathrooms, were stored in halls, in hallways. I mean, that has a direct, damage or harm to national security. They're troubling. But I really think, and it's tied to what we're seeing today, which is what we should be expecting. The when is incredibly important. When are we going to have these pretrial hearings? When is there going to be a trial? Because it's critical that people who have concerns and have doubts actually see what the evidence is so that it can inform their decisions.
I am told by a reliable source that you're familiar with some of the human beings that make up the team working on behalf of Jack Smith. If that is untrue, feel free to say so. But what can you tell us about the men and women who were inside that courtroom today and how they will deal with this rather unprecedented political environment around a very serious, as you said, around the four corners of the legal case they have brought? There is an undeniable circus-like environment outside.
Well, it appears that Special Counsel Smith has brought together exactly the team that you would want. In addition to, I believe David was based on reporting, was considered the lead prosecutor at the hearing. There are at least two attorneys from my old section, the Counterintelligence and Export Control section, who appear to be at the hearing, and I will tell you those two attorneys, as a pair, are more experienced with the Espionage
Act.
On the rest of us not to let that happen.
You're the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. You are the former national security advisor. You know of classified documents, secret documents. Do you believe, based on the facts laid out in the indictment, that Donald Trump put the U.S. and its allies at risk with his possession, insecure storage, and then refusal to turn over these documents? We also know, of course, just from reporting, that there have been at least two Chinese nationals and another con woman of sorts who have gotten access to Mar-a-Lago.
Look, sorry. Obviously, the government has to prove its case to a jury. There's no doubt about it. But I know what kinds of documents we used to give to Donald Trump to help him make decisions. I don't know specifically what the documents look like that the special counsel has listed in the indictment. But if they're anything like some of the things we presented to Trump in the Oval Office, in the Situation Room, and the tank at the Pentagon, it could cause enormous damage, incalculable damage to the United States. And I know some people are saying, well, we don't have any allegation the Russians have seen these documents or the Chinese have seen these documents. The purpose of the provisions of the Espionage Act and other protections around national security information is to reduce the chances that our adversaries can get the documents. And the behavior that's alleged in the complaint, intentional, clearly intentional, after receiving the subpoena that Trump didn't want to receive, is just willfully puts the United States in grave danger. I think people need to focus on this reality. This is not some case about porn stars and hush monies. The conduct alleged here, direct threat to the national security of the United States.
One of the big questions that I think everybody watching has is why? Why would he take these documents with him to Mar-a-Lago? Why would he show them, as alleged in the indictment, to random people that definitely don't have national security clearance? And why would he not just turn them over when the FBI was demanding that he do so?
Well, I think there's a sense of entitlement about Donald Trump, that what he wants he's entitled to. He can take it, he can do what he wants with it, and he doesn't face consequences. And I'd have to say, based on his career to date, he had very strong reason to think he could do whatever he wanted to do. And so he could show to people, I've got documents you can't have and you can't see. I can tell the FBI that I don't have information and I can get away with it. I can do all these things, and his experience would tell him that there would be no downside for him. Now we're about to find out whether there's going to be downside. I think he's shocked by this. I think this is he's been put in a situation he has never experienced before.
Lastly, sir, before you go, and we do appreciate your time, what's your message to the Republicans who continue to stand by his side, the Lindsey Grahams of the world, the Marco Rubios of the world, the individuals out there who are saying this is just a political prosecution, this is not real, the charges are unfair, this is just people out to get Donald Trump? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say this, for those who think there's a double standard, and take, for purposes of this discussion, assume there is a double standard. Assume Hillary Clinton should have been prosecuted, and it was not fair that she wasn't. That Joe Biden should be prosecuted, and it's not fair that he's not. That's what these people believe. The answer to their complaint about a double standard, the question they should be asked is, even though Biden has escaped scot-free, Clinton has escaped scot-free, fill in the blank has escaped scot-free, is the answer to the double standard to let Donald Trump escape scot-free? Is the answer to the double standard to revert to no standard at all? I think that's wrong. I think Republicans have rightly believed for a long time that when you don't prosecute criminals, you get more crimes. And the answer is, when you've got the allegations in a complaint like this with the conduct that indictment shows, the prosecution is entirely warranted. Worry about the others later. This is the decision before you. I want Republicans who think Trump should be given a pass to say so explicitly. Don't what about it. Talk about whether you think this complaint, this indictment, shows criminal behavior. And if it does, we should all favor prosecuting.
All right, former Ambassador and National Security Advisor John Bolton, thank you so much for your time. A dramatic day in Miami as Donald Trump is about to take off on his plane from Florida after entering a not guilty plea to all 37 counts of his federal indictment. In just minutes, we're going to get reaction from one of his rivals in the Republican presidential contest, Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas. More special coverage on this special edition of The Lead next.
Let's leave it right there. Going to end
dramatic day in Miami as Donald Trump is about to
end this video here pertaining to this event. In one way, yes, it is a historical event, but it's historical in a bad way. This is not something that a country such as America should have for its bragging rights of being able to say 25 years from now, oh yeah, y'all remember that guy Donald Trump? Oh yeah, we done this and we done that. Sticking their chest out, acting like the big and bad, this is not something that deserves to be put on a pedestal of bragging rights. This is something that is humiliating to the American people. It's disgraceful that it's reached this level, that now 37 charges went towards Trump. And the whole thing could have been eliminated. The whole thing could have been eliminated towards both groups of people that wanted Donald Trump in there. So they're getting what they wanted. They're getting exactly what they wanted, which is chaos. And I don't see how anybody could have a chance to even complain about it. This is what they wanted. They wanted a diversion, and that's what they're getting. In other words, everybody's thinking about this versus thinking about fentanyl, or thinking about the $32 trillion, or thinking about the mistakes that we've made in Afghanistan, or thinking about all the illegal immigrants coming over here, or thinking about all the other problems that we got. It's a diversion. It's a distraction. Thanks again. Good luck to all of us. God bless. God bless you for watching and listening and paying attention to some of the things that that the founder of the ministries has to say. God bless America. Good luck to all of us. Heaven help us all. And may God bless our troops. Shalom.